Sleep is one of the greatest predictors of how well we age, yet it's also one of the first areas to unravel when anxiety, trauma, or hidden conflicts rise to the surface. What we often dismiss as bad sleep can actually be a window into our mental and emotional well-being. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies behind living a longer, healthier, and more purposeful life. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong, an exercise physiologist with a passion for making science simple and life better as we age. My guest is Dr. Brian A. Sharpless, internationally recognized expert on sleep and anxiety disorders, and author of Monsters on the Couch, the real psychological disorders behind your favorite horror movies. His work blends scientific rigor with cultural storytelling, making the complex world of sleep both fascinating and practical. From night terrors to exploding head syndrome, Dr. Sharpless helps us understand why our nights can feel haunted and how that impacts our ability to age well. The Aging Well podcast encourages informed decision-making and always consult your physician and scientific literature when making decisions about your health. Well, Dr. Sharpless, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. You've written extensively and spoken extensively about the monsters that haunt our nights, not just as fantasy, but as psychology. What first drew you to the intersection of sleep, anxiety, and fear?
Well, I must confess I've always loved horror movies. I've always been into strange things. I was reading books about monsters and paranormal stuff when I was a kid. And so when I went and started studying psychology, I actually started out pretty traditional. I was doing anxiety research, psychotherapy research. And then when I was on postdoc, I had the opportunity to work a new project into a panic disorder study. And so at the time, there was some speculation that sleep paralysis, which is a really fun disorder I'm sure we'll probably talk about, was very prevalent in people with panic disorder and also in African American communities. So I was on postdoc at UPenn, high African American community there, on a panic disorder study, so it seemed natural. So I developed a measure, trained all the diagnosticians how to administer it, and every single person got this measure. So I was able to get really good data on people with sleep paralysis and found out not only was it more common than I thought, but it also was associated with real problems for people. Some people were really bothered by it. So then that kind of was my gateway drug to getting into other rare and unusual disorders. And I started branching out a bit into exploding head syndrome, clinical therianthropy, working on some sexomnia right now. So yeah. Lots of fun stuff.
Yeah, we're going to dive into a lot of that today. So this is going to be a very fascinating conversation. I think this is actually it's probably not maybe the first psychological episode we've had on this podcast, but it's certainly the first that has kind of dived into sleep disturbances and anxiety and all those things, putting those together. And so for those of our listeners and viewers who are more unfamiliar, can you explain the connection between anxiety and sleep disturbances? And why do our worries often seem a lot louder at night?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a bi-directional relationship, meaning that one could kind of hit the other. So there are some longitudinal studies that seem to imply that if you start out with insomnia early, you're going to be more likely to have anxiety, but certainly the opposite can be true. So when we go to sleep, we can't try to go to sleep. That's like one of the worst things you can do is try to force yourself. Oh, I got to get to sleep. That doesn't work. So the things that we're carrying over from the day, our worries, the things we're kind of beating ourselves up over, that kind of leads to a state of hyperarousal. And so that makes it very hard for us to get to sleep.
So that's interesting. You said we can't force ourselves to sleep, but we're in a heavily medicated society. And so many people taking melatonin to go to sleep, or people who are taking sleep medications. And we've had some doctors on before that have linked dementia to many of the medications that are commonly prescribed for sleep. Is that all kind of tied in? I mean,
well, what I was referring to is like a personal will kind of issue.
Okay.
Like, of course, if with the right kind of drugs, get some propofol, you'll go to sleep. But in terms of trying to force ourselves to sleep, like, oh God, I've got to get to sleep. I'm going to miss this. I'm going to be terrible. Driving is going to be bad. I'm going to miss this meeting. We really can't do that. The best we can do is sort of set the stage and maximize our probability. So making sure the room's nice and dark, making sure it's a good temperature, making sure we don't drink alcohol or caffeine before bed, make sure we don't work out too close to bedtime, do the things that we do. Don't use a lot of screen time and give our poor, Homo sapien brains the message that we're still in daytime. Those are the things that we can do to make it more likely that we'll get to sleep, and kind of remember that if we don't get to sleep as much as we want tonight, we will tomorrow.
And that sleep hygiene is one of our 6 pillars that we all often talk about on this podcast, is, being one of the pillars of aging well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
There's so many bad things happen, as you know, I'm sure very well, if you don't get enough sleep. It's associated with cardiovascular health, associated with mental health disorders, obesity. Yeah. It affects a lot of different stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'm an exercise physiologist. So historically, I've always kind of put exercise at the top of the important things to do for our health and longevity and well-being. Over time now, sleep and purposeful social connections have kind of crept up, but those are more important. But from the standpoint, sleep, you can't exercise well if you're not well rested. Yeah. And you're not going to rest as well or sleep as well if you're not exercising. But and that sleep is going to be important to recovering from that exercise. And so I've started to really put that up as one of those top pillars.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know if it's the highest, but I'd put exercise and sleep and social connections. They're pretty important, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, because you can survive on a somewhat lousy diet. It may not be the best thing for you, but if you're not sleeping, your life is messed up. And as I'm sure we're going to talk about, those monsters are going to creep into our heads, right? So we know sleep changes naturally as we age. From your perspective, how do anxiety and unresolved inner conflicts help complicate sleep for older adults?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, so many changes happen over sleep as we age. When we're infants, we're sleeping over half the day, and the sleep's different. It's very fragmented. We don't have the distinct sleep stages that we see in later life. And even more interesting, they have what's called active sleep, which is sort of similar to rapid eye movement sleep, where a lot of the memory consolidation and learning takes place. And so then after we reach a certain age, we start seeing those distinct stages and we start sleeping less. And then by the time we're in early, adolescence or teenage years, we're maybe sleeping 8 to 10 hours a night, somewhere in there. And then some weird things happen at that age. So our circadian rhythms don't quite match a 24-hour clock. So that's why teenagers want to stay up later and sleep in, which isn't very conducive for going to school, right? So, or for, telling your kids to go to sleep. So then you've got that stressor. So you've got kind of a mismatch between what your biology wants to do and what society wants you to do during those ages, as if teenage years weren't hard enough.
Yeah.
And then as we get older, we start sleeping less and we start sleeping lighter. And so we can be more easily disturbed from sleep. And with aging, we also get a tendency to have to get up and go to the bathroom more, which disturbs sleep. And we just, it can become more challenging. And you will see in elderly populations that about 3/4 of them will report some degree of insomnia symptoms, but not necessarily much less. But it becomes harder.
And so with many people, they just tend to assume that poor sleep is just part of getting older. How much of this is true and how much of it is kind of treatable once we start to understand the root causes and begin to kind of address those?
Well, the good news is that even if you are having problematic sleep, there's a lot that you can do. I think you had a former guest talking about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So that's a really effective gold standard treatment. And little simple things you can do, like I was talking about, in your bedroom. Get some nice sheets. Don't have the ones that feel like sandpaper. Get good blackout curtains. So a lot of things you can do. And if problems are persisting, again, a course of CBTI or some medications might be useful. But, there are usually some simple things that people are doing which are making it hard for them. So as we get older, we tend to want to take naps, which if you don't have insomnia, you're not prone to insomnia, that's fine. If you're prone to insomnia, that's a recipe for disaster in a lot of cases, because you're kind of screwing up your patterns. And if you're, one of the first things you want to do if you're having problems sleeping is get to a routine, go to bed and wake up at the same time, which is hard if you have shift work, for instance.
Oh, yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah, or if you're a college kid and you have an 8 o'clock class Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then a noon class Tuesday, Thursday, what are you going to do? You're not going to keep your sleep schedule. But if you do have insomnia.
Yeah, I try and push my students to keep as much of a sleep cycle as possible. And I've been educating them on the fact, okay, yeah, you can get to bed early and get up early throughout the week, but then Friday, Saturday, you decide it's party time, you're going to stay up late and sleep in.
Yeah.
By the time Monday rolls around, you've literally shifted your time zone.
Exactly.
So getting that consistent rest is a real challenge, but it's important.
And stress. We have different kinds of stressors as we age. When we're little kids, school age kids might have bullying, stress. They might have things going on. As you get older, you get more responsibilities. When you're in what a colleague calls the rush hour years, when we're spending a lot of time working and grinding it out, you've got multiple demands competing. You've got an increased complexity of your life. You might find yourself having to give up on things like social connection because you have too much work to do. And there are all these ways that bad patterns and things that can keep us from sleep start creeping in if we're not careful. And it can be very insidious.
So you've studied some pretty rare and fascinating disorders. You mentioned exploding head syndrome. I think
Sure.
Talk about that. Can you explain what this is and why conditions like it matter for understanding the human mind?
Yeah. Well, it's a very dramatic name. It's not nearly that dramatic. Otherwise, my office would look a lot messier. But I think episodic cranial sensory shocks would be better. But doesn't roll off the tongue as much.
It's not as sexy.
Doesn't get media attention like exploding head syndrome. But what it is essentially is as you're going to sleep or waking up, you hear a massively loud noise in your head or feel the sense of it, which is why JMS Pierce named it, because some people were feeling the sensation of an explosion. But most people will hear something auditory. They'll describe guns. They'll describe a bomb going off. Some of the more dramatic ones, if you've ever watched like the Roadrunner cartoons, they said their exploding head syndrome sounded like the coyote dropping a piano on trying to hit the Roadrunner. I heard one of my favorite ones was a massive guitar string that breaks. That's what they would hear is going. And needless to say, it's startling. And so people will jump up and they'll be really upset, wondering what happened. Was there a terrorist event in the neighborhood? They also can have visual phenomena as well. About a quarter of people hear the sound, but they'll see visual static or lightning as well. And then making it worse, a small percentage of people will wake up. They'll be so startled, they forget how to breathe. Wow. At least that's what they're experiencing. So they can't breathe. There's this crazy noise going on, and then they're there. So most people, it's more common than you would think. So when I first started studying it, the clinical lore, which you have to take with a grain of salt, as you know, was that this really is rare and only happens in women over the age of 50. Didn't seem to make a lot of sense why that would be the case. So I got a sample of undergrads on the east and west coast of the US, got a pretty good sample, and conducted clinical interviews with all of them. We found out 18% of the sample of young adults, generally between 18 and 21, had at least once. Very few had it to the extent it was a problem. Of those, only about 3% had it where it was significantly interfering with their life. But those folks are out there. I've met people who experience this 5 to 7 times every single night, which causes
sleep.
You don't very well. It's constantly disrupted, which again, it creates a vicious cycle because you're going to be more likely to have this or any other parasomnia the more disrupted your sleep cycle. And it's makes you terrified to go to bed. People get conditioned fear responses to the bedroom. And it's been associated, and I didn't know this until I studied it. My university, when I was at Washington State, press released an article because it had a sexy title, Exploding Head Syndrome is Common in College Students. So you wouldn't think that a peer-reviewed article would make the rounds, but it did. And then I started getting all these interesting calls that were telling me, you're an idiot. This is not a neurological. This isn't a strange sleep disorder. It's the government shooting energy waves. They're trying to torment you and drive you crazy. I started getting this call. Tell me more. And it turned out it was linked to a broader belief, which again, I didn't know much about, but there are Facebook groups with tens of thousands of people about gang stalking, which is the belief that you're being systematically targeted for harassment by nefarious agents, usually governments. But what that told me, kind of in a similar way to isolated sleep paralysis, which we can talk about, that when you have these unusual experiences, you have to make sense of them. How do you make sense of hearing this crazy noise that's not there? So if you have sort of neurological categories, you might start to wonder, I wonder maybe the reticular formation of the brainstem's doing something. If you have more conspiratorial leanings and there's no objective external explanation for why this happened, is that unreasonable? If that's how you view the world? So we organize the world with the categories that we have.
And so does that worldview kind of tend to feed the disorder, or is it just kind of a result of the disorder?
Yeah, I wish I had causal data on that. I'm guessing it's sort of bidirectional. So with sleep paralysis, which maybe I could talk about but that's where you're going to bed or waking up and you find yourself completely unable to move. So you are atonic except for your eyes. And so what goes on is you're having dreams then while you're awake and paralyzed. 80% of the time people have dreams. So they're having hallucination while they're on their back and while their eyes are there, and they know they're not asleep, and they can even look around the room. So a good chunk of those folks see beings in the room with them and might even have contact with them, which is why this is one of the best naturalistic explanations for belief in alien abductions, demonic possession. You know, people that experience these things, they're not more likely to have schizophrenia than somebody that doesn't have it. But if you have these unusual experiences, they might make you really believe it. And in the sleep paralysis literature, which is more extensive than exploding head syndrome, there is a relationship between paranormal beliefs and the condition. What causes what, I don't know, but people who do have supernatural beliefs are more likely to experience these. It's not a huge effect, and anybody could conceivably have it, but there's a way in which it might make it more likely. And when you're having the experience, you might organize the experience in ways consistent with your beliefs. So the core features of sleep paralysis are really invariant across culture. Paralysis, you've got the ability to move your eyes generally, and you're on your back paralyzed and seeing stuff. But what do you see? So in Zanzibar, they will see the Pope of Bawa, which is this giant black bat that gets on top of you and sexually assaults you. Okay. In Newfoundland, they're visited by the old hag, which is this aged woman like a witch who's on top of you and strangling you. In Japan, they experience kanashibari, which is to feel like they're bound or fastened by strips of metal. Could be magical metal. And so every culture puts their own little stamp on it, but then we've got the individual factors. So this is really terrifying, but I've worked with a few people who were assault survivors. And when they would experience sleep paralysis, they would hallucinate their attackers in the room with them while they can't move. I mean, if that's not nightmare fuel, it is, right? So there's individual beliefs, cultural beliefs that sort of get superimposed onto this strange sleep phenomenon, which when you get right down to it, it's a mixed state between wakefulness and REM sleep. So we're awake, but we have the paralysis of REM, which is important because otherwise we'd act out our dreams and hurt ourselves and other people. And we've got that interesting dream mentation that's most vivid during REMs, but it's going on while we're awake.
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend because aging is something we're all doing and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast. So how do we know that we're doing that and it's not just our REM sleep, that we're just having this dream where our eyes are closed, we're sleeping, we're in deep REM sleep, but we're perceiving that we are in our bed and we're seeing the things going on around us?
Yeah, that's tricky. Most people are very clear that they're looking around their room and they can see their light, they can see their sheets, they might even be able to see their partner sleeping beside them and be trying to call out for them as some malevolent dwarfs on their chest throttling them, you know. So, but there are those kind of dreams that it's really hard to figure out, are you asleep or are you awake? And there's even a more interesting phenomenon called sleep state misperception, which is that's really what it is, where you think you're awake when you're actually asleep and you think you're asleep when you're actually awake. But in this case, you've got a clear sensorium, so you can hear normally, you can see normally, but you've got these hallucinations that feel just as real and look and sound just as real as anything that your audience is listening to right now.
And being someone who has watched all 15 seasons of Supernatural at least 5 times, how do we know it's not really a monster under our bed?
Well, you gotta get a flashlight that's powerful enough to see. Well, I mean, there are some good reasons why sleep paralysis is a better explanation than the paranormal. For one, we have a good understanding of how sleep paralysis actually happens. So it's that mixed stage of sleep. We actually have identified the neurotransmitters that cause the paralysis, GABA and glycine. And then we also have the ability to induce it in a lab. Oh, wow. So there was a Japanese researcher who was able to monitor when people were asleep and would sort of jostle them. And you can actually induce sleep paralysis if you cause a partial awakening while someone's in REM sleep. So I was assuming that Japanese researcher can't sort of summon demons at will. that's proof for the non-supernatural hypothesis. Also, people have their PER2 gene has a slight mutation in it. And so we've known for a while that sleep paralysis tends to be more common in certain families, even though anybody can have, there does seem to be a genetic contribution to that. And you can also kind of treat it. So unless demons and aliens are afraid of Prozac, you can actually make sleep paralysis less likely to occur through giving things that will, as a side effect, affect REM sleep, like a lot of the SSRIs and even tricyclic antidepressants. One of the well-known side effects is reducing REM. And that can be a problem if you're treating depression, but with this, you'd actually use it as the active treatment.
So we've had a lot of conversation on this podcast about psychedelics and psilocybins and so on, and we're starting to dive into that a little bit more. Do those play any role in the treatment of some of these, or is there just not enough research yet, or because it's illegal in most states, it's not even getting explored?
Well, you probably won't be surprised to learn there have been no randomized clinical trials for either sleep paralysis or exploding head syndrome. But the main approaches are there's two psychotherapy forms that can be useful. One that I developed called cognitive behavioral therapy for isolated sleep paralysis. There's another one that's meditation based, and there are various pharmacological agents that have been used. So antidepressants seem promising, again, even without the large scale clinical trials. GHB has actually been used. It's used to treat narcolepsy, and sleep paralysis used to be part of the narcoleptic tetrad. For some reason, they removed it, but you still see it very, very frequently in folks that have that unfun disorder.
So what causes it? Do we know?
Yeah, you've got a dissociated sleep state. So you've got REM superimposed on wakefulness. So there's a lot. I mean, as you know very well, sleep is super, super complicated. And there's a lot that can go wrong every single night. So another disorder that's kind of the opposite of isolated sleep paralysis is called REM sleep behavior disorder. And in this, you are asleep, you are actively in REM sleep and dreaming, but you're not paralyzed. So here you have folks that are throwing themselves out of bed, that are injuring themselves by smacking walls, because what seems to happen during REM sleep, and I'm not sure why this is, but they seem to be dreaming of attacks and being chased. And there was at least one documented case of a gentleman with REM sleep behavior disorder who killed his wife because he believed he was dreaming. And this was a guy, he was faking. He had a long history of sleep disorders, other parasomnia. And in this state, you don't know what you're doing, and you're reacting to the dream. I was just telling someone, I was at a sleep conference in Prague a few years ago, and there was a researcher who was presenting on this, and she put the polysomnogram data up there with a video of the patient and actually used CGI to animate what he thought was happening. And so this gentleman believed he was being attacked by pterodactyls. So this poor elderly guy is like flailing around trying to keep the beak away from him, the claws. And he believed in that moment, because he was dreaming, that he was being attacked by a pterodactyl, but he could move around. So you see lots of injuries. One of the things you'll do with someone like that, you'll have them actually change their bedroom. You might need to put mats on the floor. If they have bedposts, you need to cover them up with foam and do things like that certainly don't sound like psychotherapy, but they're very useful to keep people safe. Yeah. And so that's one of the ways you've got REM sleep not acting like REM sleep. You've got the lack of paralysis that you see in the non-REM sleep stages, and obviously.
One thing I've noticed is I've been diagnosed with sleep apnea. I'm not sure. My CPAP's not helping me a lot.
Me too, actually.
Yeah. But, how I sleep tends to, at least from my perception, tends to affect how I dream. Like, I feel like if I sleep on my right side, I'm tending to process more things like for work and all that kind of stuff. And if I sleep on my left side is where I have those more kind of vivid, deep REM sleeps where it's like these just bizarre, trying to think of specific themes that kind of come up.
Colonel Sanders is doing something.
Yeah, things like that. Is there any research to that or any truth to that, how our bodies are positioned can have an impact on how we sleep?
I don't know. That's really interesting. I've not come across that. In the sleep paralysis literature, one thing that's been replicated many times is that sleeping on your back makes it more likely. So one of the easiest things your audience could do if they have sleep paralysis and they don't want to have it is sleep on their side. You're most likely to have it in a supine position, next most likely sleeping on your belly, and least likely to have a side. So you could also tell your partner if you're sleeping on your back. So there are simple things you can do. So that's one of the ways that sort of our sleep position can impact it, but I'm not sure about the nature of the dreams. Yeah.
So when we talk about night terrors and insomnia, and how most often, when people talk about those, we hear them separated. People have insomnia or people have night terrors. How do they overlap in situations with people with anxiety disorders?
Yeah, well, anything that really makes sleep disruption occur is going to make the parasomnias like sleep paralysis, exploding head, and those things more likely to. So you'll find people with disturbed sleep and also people with insomnia, they'll be more likely to have these things. And if you're not sleeping well, you're not feeling too good. So you might be more anxious. You might be more depressed. Your mood's a bit dysregulated. So you'll be more prone to have that go on.
So how does trauma, especially unresolved trauma, kind of manifest itself in sleep?
Yeah. Well, we've known for a long time, probably going back to at least the Civil War, that folks that went through traumas will have problems sleeping. And our best guess is that it leads to a hyperarousal, which again isn't conducive to actually getting to sleep. Okay. So that when all of your assumptions for safety in the world and your own bodily integrity have been shattered, it's not going to make you feel too steady. And there's an adjustment that needs to happen to kind of heal from that trauma. And certain things might go away quicker than others, but you see in the acute stages of trauma, sleep disruption, having a hard time going to sleep, people don't feel safe. And in terms of specific parasomnias, there are linkages. So people that have trauma and PTSD in their background will be more likely to have isolated sleep paralysis and maybe even work their attackers in dreams if it's that kind of attack. There was a researcher at Harvard named Devin Hinton who studied the Hmong, and a good chunk of the sample of the refugees were seeing their attackers in Khmer Rouge uniforms while they were having sleep paralysis.
And does that, we talked on one episode recently about how trauma can have kind of lasting epigenetic effects. Does that carry over into your research? Do you see that some of these dream disorders or sleep disorders are somewhat genetic, epigenetic? I mean, you mentioned one marker for, I think was the exploding.
For sleep paralysis, there's a marker on there's a mutation on the PER2 gene. I mean, trauma leads to massive effects. I mean, shortening telomeres, all sorts of wild stuff. I primarily don't get into that work. I generally don't work with neurotransmitters, usually descriptions, but there's some research on that. And just one of the things that I've found that was wild is that successfully treated trauma, you can actually see brain changes. So you can give people fMRIs pre and post treatment, and you can see positive changes with positive treatment. So even if terrible things have happened to us, we can kind of get back to some semblance of where we are and potentially even be stronger.
That's always good news.
Yeah. So I don't know if that completely answered your question, but
no, I didn't expect a complete answer. I was just curious if there's, if you kind of cross paths with any research that might indicate that, or if there's any, areas, individuals that are maybe starting to explore some of that, or if it's just something that popped into my lame head. So
probably a little bit A, a little bit of B. I haven't looked at that specifically. Yeah, too busy studying clinical werewolves and things like that.
Well, that's to say, I mean, we can only explore so much within our respective fields. And let's talk about your book a little bit. Monsters on the Couch. It links horror films to real psychological disorders. So what can pop culture teach us about the way humans experience fear and anxiety?
Oh, boy. A whole lot. Well, kind of, you can think of almost every movie or book written as a little bit of a confession of the author. And at the very least, kind of how they think about things. And so you see a lot of fun things in horror that resonate with us. We like to be scared. Someone described it as horror movies kind of hijack the fear response. So a lot of the same neurotransmitters and hormones are released when we watch horror movies that we'd release if we were in the woods and saw a tiger, but in the safe confines of a theater, it feels pleasurable. And it actually can make us feel closer to the people around us, which is why it's a great idea to bring a date to a horror movie. You might have a better chance of a repeat engagement if you do so. And I think apart from being transgressive, which some horror films are really, thinking Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Saw, things like that, I think they do kind of make us confront deeper issues. Like vampire movies might seem kind of silly, but the smarter ones, like Interview with a Vampire, Only Lovers Left Alive, they kind of hit this idea of we all kind of want to be immortal. We all have had that fantasy. What would it be like? Oh my God, I could finally learn that language I've always wanted to learn. I could learn to be a better day trader and make millions of dollars, if I have eternity to practice. But these movies kind of show a different picture. Think of Louis from Interview with a Vampire. He wasn't really enjoying life. And Only Lovers Left Alive, one of the vampires in there, played by the guy that played Loki in the Marvel movies, he didn't want to live anymore. He didn't want to go on. So there's a way in which the zest for life, that kind of the passion for life leaves. And I think the Greeks made that point, but it's not as much fun to watch as maybe a movie. That, they had the idea that gods envied us because we're mortal. We know we're going to die. So every decision, every day has a bit more urgency and kind of tragic beauty. And so it propels us, because we know we're going to die, to do things. And it's interesting. There's some psychological research that if you can kind of, in subtle ways, not like, put someone in a terrible car accident, but confront them with their mortality, make them realize their mortality, what you see are changes in health behaviors. You'll see them wanting to exercise more or make better food choices. You also see them wanting to and feeling more committed to the people in their lives. So there's a way in which death could, if taken to an extreme, overwhelm you. You get kind of like Woody Allen movies, just preoccupied with death to the extent you can't live. Or you go to the other extreme of completely denying death and acting as if it isn't there, which I don't think either of those extremes is good. Or somewhere in the middle where you recognize it and use it as a stimulus. Memento mori, Yeah. And people as disparate as Sigmund Freud and Heidegger, and I think even St. Augustine, they were united in one thing, that to be an adult is to have to recognize your mortality and to use that.
So kind of shifting away from monsters for a second, and I hadn't really planned on going this direction, but you've kind of led me to it for a moment. We have a lot in like the longevity circles, and we deal with this a lot on the podcast. We're about aging well, so we're kind of in that middle between the two extremes that you were talking about, and trying to live in those areas. But we have some individuals, I won't name any specific wealthy individuals, who are, in a sense, trying to spend millions of dollars a year to be immortal.
Yeah.
And yet, to me,
big in Silicon Valley right now.
Yeah. What's the point in that? What's the danger in that as we look at kind of our mental health?
Well, you could have very wealthy vampires if it's possible. Very dissatisfied. I don't know. I haven't really explored that kind of idea of essentially uploading our consciousness. I don't know if it's possible. I think there are real limits to and differences between wetware like the human brain and hardware like computer systems. I'm not sure. I'm sure I'll get a lot of pain making that statement, but I think there could be fundamental qualitative differences. I don't know. It's an interesting fantasy. And a lot of people are afraid of death and would do just about anything, would spend their fortunes to avoid it, I'm sure.
So where do you fall on the spectrum? Do you want to live forever, or would you rather, is your goal just to live this moment as best as possible, knowing
being a human, I'm full of contradictory stuff. As with most people, I won't lie. Of course, there's a part of me that's intrigued by that. The idea of like not seeing how life shakes out, not seeing certain people again. It's a terrifying thought. Yeah. But there's also, and I've seen this with patients, that I spent a year in my postdoc, and one of my rotations was in a palliative care unit. So I was working with a lot of cancer patients and their families, and some of them were in the process of dying, and they had a very short amount of time left. And I did see some people that went to these profound levels of despair, gnashing their teeth, wanting more time. And other people, they had this ability to come to a calm acceptance of it and be like, okay, that was enough. I hope to be one of those folks. But I am driven to do lots of different stuff, and I want to do a lot of stuff before I die. And for some reason, I even have irrational thoughts. When I'm not here, I kind of want to have an impact, which from a logic makes sense, but it's kind of a more emotional kind of thing. But I would like to have some sort of what philosophers would call objective immortality, as opposed to subjective, where your subjective consciousness kind of keeps on going. Right. There is something attractive of things I leave behind being meaningful, whether it's dumb books I've written or my influence on patients or friends and family and things like that. So I do want that.
Hopefully we all want that. But
yeah.
I'm wondering, in your kind of clinical experience, do you see differences in how we approach, facing death in children versus adults?
You mean children facing death or facing the death of children?
Children facing death versus adults facing death. So you've had cancer patient.
I only work with adults. I don't work. Yeah, I haven't done any child therapy since internship. So I only work with adults. I mean, it feels more tragic, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it seems like it feels more tragic to us as adults.
Yeah.
And it is more tragic to, I think, as us as adults. But it seems like for children, they tend to embrace it a lot better. I've had a couple of friends who have lost children to brain cancer.
Yeah.
And, horrible on the parents, and understandably so. But when you watch the children in their final days and their years, they just seem so much more alive than we tend to be when we're older. And maybe we just feel like we have more to lose, or we haven't done as much as we want to do in life. And a child doesn't realize what they're losing when they die young. I don't know, but I don't know why I had to go down that tangent. But
yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thought. I mean, I first went to the place of, there are developmental differences in how we understand. Talking to a 5-year-old about death is a 45-year-old, and the level of understanding. I wonder if that's a piece of it, but you kind of, I don't know. This is kind of maybe a stupid example, but if you've seen like videos of animals dying, they seem to get to this place that's a bit different than how we get to. There's kind of some sort of a psychological difference. I don't know how to really articulate it. And I wonder if that might be kind of similar, if you don't quite have that same understanding, if you don't have that kind of desire to keep something going beyond the natural limit. We kind of get in trouble when we do that with emotions. We try to suppress bad things, and we try to prolong good things. So we want joy to last as long as possible. So we try to force it, and that makes the joy go away. And we try to shove bad things down, which makes them kind of erupt a bit. Kids and animals don't do that as much. I think they're more in the moment, potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a lesson for all of us, just simply to live in that moment.
How easy is that, though?
It's not, I think it's important that we do. But let's kind of get back to horror movies.
Please.
We can go down this whole rabbit hole here and we'll never get to the topic of your book as much. But do you think horror movies can actually help us process fear in a healthy way? Or do they tend to amplify, or is it kind of a mixed bag?
Yeah, I think there are individual differences. Some people get really affected by horror movies. Some people see them as entertaining and very thought-provoking. And one of the things that I've really liked is how these very strange movies that we watch, there are correlates in us. So there is a real corresponding disorder to werewolf movies. It's called clinical therianthropy, which is where you have the delusion which is that you turn into an animal and acquire that animal's characteristics. And so myself and a colleague, we recently reviewed all the scientific literature going back even before the 1800s, medical descriptions of this. We were able to find 77 descriptions of people who believe they turned into an animal. I had a sample enough. I might be the first person to actually do statistical analyses on werewolves. I was very tickled by that. It made me very proud. But we found some interesting things that wolves were not the most common animal. It was actually dogs. But I found in a peer-reviewed study a man who believed he turned into a gerbil. And so he started it. He was nonverbal when he was in the gerbil mode. He would sleep under a table, And his nose even was twitching in that cute way rodents. And while there, he did not have his human consciousness. He firmly had the conviction and the behaviors of an animal. And you see this. It's probably more common than 77 in like a few hundred years, because my colleague's a psychiatrist in the Netherlands, and on his unit he sees one every 1 or 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And there was a case in Belgium of a woman who believed she was a chicken, which sounds hysterical, of course, but it's tragic because she can't function. There are cases of people who have believed they were dogs, and they go out and they're running around the streets and get hit by cars, eat things they shouldn't eat, and really put their lives in danger when they're under the full sway of the delusion, and they really believe it. And
So
it's only after they come out of it, they might have some recollection, but they might be amnestic to being in that.
So this isn't probably the same as, what these people call themselves furries or something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked about there being kind of a dimensionality. So that there are people that do legitimately identify with aspects of animal forms, and sometimes even mythical creatures like fairy foxes would be a popular one, or dragons, and they kind of have this identification with it. So there's an identification with being an animal, but that's kind of a far cry away from drinking out of the toilet and believing you're a dog, and and you have no kind of recognition that there are human parts of you. It feels, the way it's similar to the movies is that if you remember like American Werewolf in London, when David turns, he doesn't know he's David at that moment when he's the wolf, and he doesn't even know after he comes out of being a wolf that he was a wolf. So that's what you see in clinical therianthropy versus the furries and the scant research on that group. They have a sense that that they are in a human form, but there's a psychological or a spiritual identification with the animal form as well.
This is all fascinating,
isn't it?
So,
yeah.
So like the whole concept, like werewolves and vampires and a lot of that because we've had kind of these monsters in our lore for centuries, well before movies started to be filmed. Yeah. So is some of this in the lore just simply the psychological syndromes that have just kind of presented themselves and been carried down over time?
Yeah, I'm guessing it's probably, depending on the disorder, it's probably both. So you can see in cave paintings these forms that are kind of half human, half animal. We don't know, since they were paintings and not words, we don't know, does that mean the person thought they turned into an animal, or they were kind of wanted to be kind of as fearless as a lion, and they were kind of psychologically identifying it, or maybe even wearing pelts like we wear sports jerseys now. We don't know, but we do know that the idea is as long as humans have been thinking about it, and it goes across culture. So it's hard to say if that kind of idea influenced the disorder or the disorder influenced the idea, or both. One thing I would tell you with sleep paralysis, there have been at least 9 or 10 movies that have dealt with sleep paralysis. And what's interesting is the majority of the directors, if not all, they know very well about sleep paralysis. I don't think many directors of werewolf movies know about clinical therianthropy and have actually read the boring old articles in the dusty libraries. But like Rodney Asher, who directed The Nightmare, he not only knew about sleep paralysis, he experienced it himself in very troubling ways. And he's told me we're friendly. And so we have lots of talks about fun sleep stuff. But he got together a group of real sufferers and used Hollywood magic to recreate their hallucinations. And one of the things I found most just shocking about it was, even though every single person that was being interviewed knew about sleep paralysis, knew there was a scientific literature on it, a good proportion of them still believed something supernatural was going on. Huh. So having that alternative perspective, we'll call it a scientific perspective, which sounds a little snooty, but having that scientific perspective didn't make their beliefs that it was something else go away. And one of the people believed he would be killed by this experience and the things that were visiting him during this.
So is it kind of we can accept that this happens to other people as a psychological disorder, but this is something different happening to me, that I am indeed being attacked by these monsters, or are they just, is it just kind of a disassociation?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure. I would guess probably some of them would think that it's legitimate, but there's something special happening to them. I did meet with one of the people, I won't disclose who, and he was firmly convinced that anytime that this happens, it was based on a supernatural cause. So for him, it was kind of the scientific description got the causality wrong. It was something that happened a lot and was troubling for people, but it was actually based on something real. It wasn't a dissociated sleep state. It was a demonic visitation. So he, at least one of them believed that. But, you could believe that something might be accurate for somebody else, but it's not true for you. You're really under threat.
Does kind of religious belief play a role in this at all?
Yeah. If we look back in old demonological tomes like the Malleus Maleficarum, the Compendium Maleficarum, that are going through kind of the learned elites of the Catholic Church writing about how to detect witches and demons, some of the descriptions map so well onto sleep paralysis. It's shocking. So especially the sexual elements that you can see. So beliefs about incubi and succubi, for instance, will often involve a demon, male or female, depending on incubus or succubus, on top of you, making it hard to breathe and you can't move, and doing things that are very similar to some of the narratives in alien abduction stories. There could be extraction of sperm, or I didn't hear about eggs back then in Roman times. Certainly, there was an idea that the demon was stealing semen and could potentially take that semen and then use it to impregnate another woman. There were all these interesting beliefs that map really well. And even, again, looking at the alien abduction narratives, the hallucinations and sleep paralysis can be kind of factor analyzed into three types. One's the intruder factor, which is where you feel that something's in the room. Then you've got the incubus factor, which is where you've got something laying on top of you, making it hard to breathe. Then you've got the vestibular motor factor, which is where you feel your body is being moved without its volition. So you're being levitated, potentially, or flying, kind of like an attractor beam, you might. So you can have different variations of those kind of hallucinations happening over the course of any one or multiple events. And so looked at from that lens, it makes, it kind of does, I think, lend some credence that it might not be alien abductions, or it might not be demonic visits.
So you got me thinking, when you talked about, cognitive behavioral therapy as a means of healing people from this, when we look at, like, with the Catholic Church with exorcism, is there any evidence that these situations have presented where somebody is believed to be demon possessed, but it's actually more of a sleep disorder, but the act of somebody coming in, sprinkling holy water on them, saying a bunch of things in Latin, actually get them to disassociate themselves from that disorder? This could take another hour podcast.
I wrote a joke in my book, which was only half a joke, that my next book was going to be called Exorcisms Are Bad. There's a phenomenon that you see called the nocebo effect. It's kind of the evil twin of the placebo effect. So what's the placebo effect? An unhelpful thing you think to be helpful helps you. Right. So a sugar pill, if you think that sugar pill is going to make you have more energy, you'll take it and you'll have more energy if you trust who gave it to you. The nocebo effect's the other thing, where a harmless thing that you believe to be harmful harms you. So these can be very powerful effects. There was a fascinating study, I think in the 50s, where you got a group of asthmatics, and you shot saline up their nose, and you told them, this is going to, don't freak out, but this is going to exacerbate your asthma. Okay. So a trusted doctor, wearing the lab coat, the whole 9 yards, shoots it up. And what do you think happens? Saline is now inducing asthma attacks. So then the doc comes back in, does the same thing, same saline solution, says this will make it go away. So what you have in this case is a nocebo effect being created that's then undone with a placebo effect. And so some people have speculated that if you are living in a demon-haunted world where possession might not only feel possible but probable, especially if maybe some really terrible things are going on in your life, some people would speculate that you could actually induce the symptoms that would look like a demonic state, that if you have somebody who you similarly believe could remove this from you, a priest with holy water and scapulas and all that fun stuff, then they might be able to remove it. But possession's really complicated. You could see, obviously, I think more skeptical folks would see the origin of possession symptoms in certain psychotic disorders, and even some personality disorders might look a bit, might have some overlap with possession. And then you've got all the weird stuff that can happen when you're sleeping. Sleepwalking, if you didn't know what it was and somebody just got up and started sleeping and not started walking and not talking to you and being seemingly insensible. Is it crazy to think they might be possessed? If you live in that world and you don't know about, sleepwalking, I don't think it's crazy. And that's why I begrudge nobody from thinking when these strange things happen to you that they were real. I mean, they are so vivid that it makes even skeptical people doubt their senses.
So what are some practical steps that people can take to improve sleep when anxiety and trauma is the underlying driver of their sleep disorder?
Well, if that's the case, you really got to do the unpleasant work of getting through the trauma or reducing the anxiety. Edna Foa, who's for my money, one of the best trauma researchers, she had this great analogy that having a trauma is like eating food poisoning, having a poisoned meal. You are not going to feel better until you go through that painful process of digesting that poisonous meal. So, if you're able to do that, if you're able to kind of move past the trauma and potentially even be strengthened as a result of the trauma, all things being equal, you would think that the sleep would improve. And if it doesn't, then you might be a really good candidate for CBTI or some of the other. But if it's more of you've got a lot of bad habits and you don't have a trauma history, then you might want to start with CBTI or even simple things like better sleep hygiene.
That's kind of my next question was going to be, how important is it to seek professional help rather than just trying to push through the insomnia or the sleep problems?
Yeah, well, it depends how bad it is, how much you're really troubled by it. I mean, if it's significantly interfering with your life, if you're not able to fulfill your functions, if you're not able to work as well or be as good a parent or take care of things, then I think you should probably seek out help, because it is in a lot of people, it is certainly treatable and pretty quickly. I mean, a course of CBTI is 9 sessions. Past assessment. That's pretty quick for a problem. And some people will suffer for years with insomnia and potentially accelerating the aging process, putting all sorts of stress on their bodies that, might be unnecessary. So if if fixes don't work, definitely seek out somebody who is a specialist and get some help. But if you're just kind of having a little trouble and it's state-like, download some handouts on sleep hygiene, start doing those things, get yourself on a sleep schedule that's rigid, even on the weekends. And start there. And if that doesn't help, seek professional help. The good news is the gold standard is actually non-medication. AMA says CBT is the first line. And if that doesn't work, then using some hypnotics might.
So if you could recommend just 1 or 2 sleep practices that can have the biggest impact on our long-term health and on our aging, what would they be?
I don't know if I can limit it to 2. Structure.
You don't have to limit it to 2.
Structure. All right. Well, thank you for being open. Structure is a good one. Try to get the things that are keeping you from sleep dealt with. So again, anxiety and trauma. Try to not take substances or eat too heavy of a meal before bed. Exercise regularly, but not right before sleep. And don't try to sleep. You can't will yourself to sleep. You just have to set the stage for it. Do the things that will make it most likely for you. Think about the things that have helped in the past and do those things. And if that doesn't work, call psychologists or psychiatrists or neurologists.
Do you recommend, tracking sleep? Like I wear currently it's a Helio strap from Amazfit because I'm too cheap to go the whole Whoop route or buy an Aura ring. And I've used a Garmin for a while, but the battery was horrible. But I've tracked sleep and then just kind of trying to look at if I eat something differently or do something differently, what impact does that have positively or negatively on my sleep?
Yeah. So there are different schools of psychotherapy. And one of the hallmarks of cognitive behavioral therapy is you really do in the beginning phases start paying attention. That alone can make certain problems go away. So if you start tracking your panic attacks, that might actually make you start having less panic. This thing that felt random and out of the blue and scary is now something that can almost be anticipated. The same thing with sleep. Before you start CBTI, you actually need a baseline of 2 weeks of sleep diaries. So you have the person fill out when they went to bed, if they got up, what they were doing, did they eat any meals beforehand? Were they taking any medications? You'd meet with your person to figure out what you want to keep track of. Get 2 weeks of data and then analyze it. And then they see how efficient you are at sleeping. And a lot of folks with insomnia are spending a lot of time in bed and they're not sleeping. So they're not very efficient. And so what you want to do is whenever you're in bed, you want to spend most of that time sleeping. And you only do 2 things in bed in CBTI, and one of them sleep. Okay. But doing homework, no. Working, no. Listening to good podcasts like yours, no. You have to do that before you go to bed.
Right. And I guess you also want to, where was I going to go with this? Kind of trying to avoid certain foods that might trigger poor sleep. Is there truth to this whole idea of, spicy meals can cause dreams?
I don't know. There's lots of myths. I mean, in the 1800s, they thought that eating alligator pears caused sleep paralysis. Alligator pear is a fancy term for what would you guess?
Testicles. That's the first thing that kind of came to mind. But
avocados, but that might cause other disturbances, depending on who's you're eating. But
I saw recently too that the name for avocado is actually, I don't know how true it is, that it's supposed to come from the fact that they look like testicles.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well,
so I wasn't far
We're
off.
in the same ballpark. Yeah. Since this is an aging podcast, in all seriousness, there was a really interesting thing I found through researching the book. So you've seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And the new one, Invasion, with Daniel Craig, my favorite James Bond, who he wasn't that great, unfortunately. He's a good actor. But that whole idea actually corresponds to a disorder called Capgras syndrome. And this is where you believe that the important people in your life were replaced with identical looking duplicates. But it gets worse because most of the people believe that the duplicate might be the person who kidnapped their actual loved one. So your wife isn't really your wife. Your husband isn't really your husband. They look like them, but they're different, and they're not the same. So one of the that's a great movie. It's fantastic. There's been, I think, 6 movies based on that premise. The Stepford Wives is another variation.
Thinking Stepford Wives.
Yeah. So it's really fun. But as I was researching that syndrome, 7 to 10% of Alzheimer's patients. In Lewy body dementia, it's 1 in 5, 20% of people. So this, what seems like a crazy out there phenomenon, is not that uncommon. And if you're working with geriatric populations, you will see it. I've seen 3 cases personally of this. And it makes for great cinema, but it's tragic because you have somebody who's declining, who's requiring their partners to take care of them. They firmly believe their partner isn't them. And that poor partner wants to take care of their loved one, but they're constantly being hit with accusations, conspiracy theory. So, it's sometimes movie plots are even scarier in real life. And you do see things like that. But again, did the director, the writer of Invasion of the Body Snatchers know about Capgras syndrome? I can't imagine. But
it sounds almost like a Stephen Wright joke to me too.
Yeah, right. The roommate one, right?
Well, I was thinking of the one where my apartment was robbed and they replaced everything with exact duplicates.
Yes,
but I can see I'm saying my wife was kidnapped and replaced with an exact duplicate. It's a deadpan joke, but for many that's not a joke. So
yeah, exactly, and you see this. You can see it in young people too. Folks with really severe bipolar disorder or psychotic disorders, but in older people, it seems to be more common. Yeah, something to look out for if you work with those folks.
Yeah, I don't want to look forward to it. That's for sure.
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to ask you the question now that we ask of all our guests. What are you doing personally to age well? I'm assuming one is sleep.
Well, I will disclose that's been in short supply lately. I caught a bad case of poison ivy on my arm, and it is just driving me crazy. It makes me want to napalm every single poison ivy plant. I got to tell you, it's brutal. So that has been impacting my own sleep. I exercise 6 days a week religiously. Might not look like it, but I do. I have a passionate commitment to that. I cap my hours on my clinical work. I found that I am much better doing multiple things. So I can't see patients all the time. I can't do research and write all the time. I have to have a mix. So I've self-consciously capped my hours. I don't go beyond so many direct hours per week. And that helps, I think, with my stress and my aging level and my emotional health as well. What else do I do? I try to eat healthy, vegetarian. I try to keep away from really, really bad stuff. And I feel a lot better when I eat good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to only drink interesting things in terms of alcohol.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I can expand on that. Interesting things, please.
I like herbal liqueurs. So my rationalization, like I like vermouths and herbal liqueurs like chartreuse like that. So my rationalization is that I'm getting some essential oils that got to be healthy.
I think,
antioxidants got to be in there.
Yeah. Even, if there's no physiological health benefits to drinking certain alcohols, I do think that when we can drink and we're getting pleasure from it from the standpoint of it's an experience,
yes,
then it can have a positive impact on our aging. Whereas if we're just drinking, it's like eating any kind of, like, you eat junk food and first bite tastes great, but then you keep eating it and it's like, why am I eating this? But you just keep eating it.
Yeah,
it's the same thing with alcohol. I mean, who in their right mind drinks Pabst Blue Ribbon? And I'm going to offend people. I'm just kind of using that as a
You just lost the potential sponsor.
Yeah, that's fine. Because to me, there's an old joke when Dennis Miller went to my high school.
Oh, okay.
You're probably just old enough to know who he is.
I know. I actually saw him live once in Reno, believe it or not. Yeah, he was hysterical. Yeah.
I saw him on Saturday Night Live, and he did an opening there. Is kind of the warm-up acts, and he was talking about, I don't know if you remember the old Milwaukee commercials where they're out in the wilderness, and they described the whole scenario, and it said, "It don't get no better than this." And he's like, "If it don't get no better than this, shoot me now, because life ain't worth living."
That sounds like Dennis Miller, for sure. So don't hold out on me. What's the number one thing I should be doing to age well, if you had to limit it to one or two?
I'm not a person of lists, and then that's one thing we always kind of poo-poo some of the lists.
You're a hypocrite by asking me to make a list then.
Yeah. I'm just asking what you're doing personally to age well. I mean, nobody's list is going to be complete or better than another. It's just we're all doing different things.
We're all trying our best in this weird life.
But, I guess if you really, threaten me with sleep paralysis, I would probably say good sleep hygiene would be the number one thing.
Wow.
What you were talking about, because if you can't get good sleep and you're sleeping less than 7 hours a night, and I guess the research is kind of now somewhere between about 7.5 to 8 is the sweet spot. You go too much above 8, it's not healthy for you. Too much below 6 is definitely bad for you. So when Arnold Schwarzenegger said, if you're sleeping more than 6 hours, sleep faster, he's actually wrong about that. But I try and get at least a little over 7 hours a day.
Yeah.
But getting good sleep allows you to do the other things. You're going to have fewer anxiety issues. You're going to have fewer mental health issues. You're going to be well rested, well recovered. Yeah, you get better memory, so you're going to perform better through the day. And if I'm going to say exercise is the number one priority, you're not going to be able to exercise well and recover from that exercise if you're not getting good sleep. And so I think that kind of sets it in that priority, because if you're not well rested, you're going to be irritable. You're going to turn people off. So your social well-being is going to be affected. Your emotional well-being is affected. Intellectually, we're not going to be able to think as clearly and learn as well in school. Spiritually, you're going to be much more self-centered when you're sleep deprived than if you're well rested and can give of yourself to other people. And so even if you're a caregiver, you're dealing with caring for an aged Alzheimer's family member. Uh-huh. If you're not getting some sleep yourself, your health is going to deteriorate and you're not going to be able to care for that individual. So I would say if I was pushed to have one thing, this is the one thing you have to do to age well, then it's going to be get good sleep.
Got my vote. Well put.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, the other would be to read Monsters on the Couch so that you can understand.
Read my other nerdy books. I have 3 other more professional books through Oxford University Press, one on sleep paralysis. That was my first book. But this was fun. So where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about your work, find not only Monsters on the Couch, but your other books? Yeah, they're all on Amazon. Oxford University Press for the first 3, and then Chicago Review Fest for Monsters on the Couch. My website's www.briansharpless.com. I give a lot of popular science lectures, so lately I've been giving a talk on the psychology of conspiracy theories. That would be interesting. So, I give a lot of those talks here and in Europe. I usually go to Bulgaria about once a year, give talks for a popular science organization over there. It's great. Everybody should go to Bulgaria. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. You can follow me on there. I don't talk about politics, so don't worry.
Okay, that's good.
So
you don't do TikTok?
Don't do TikTok. No. My social media, I kind of want to do it and don't want to do it. It's one of those complicated. I'd rather spend time writing than writing tweets, but there's a purpose in it and there's a connection there, but it's just, I'm conflicted.
Yeah, I've had to kind of lean into Instagram and LinkedIn a little bit more in terms of promoting this podcast. So, but I don't do TikTok. I leave that to my daughter.
It seems like a bad pattern to get into for me.
Yeah. And I'm not on X, formerly known as Twitter. I don't even go on and follow people on X. So is there anything we missed talking about today? I feel like we could have gone down a ton of different...
I think we only hit 3 of the chapters of the book. We didn't even hit clinical vampirism, really, or cannibalism.
We can always bring you back to talk about those.
There you go, yeah. Or Cotard syndrome. That's the delusional belief that you're dead.
Oh, wow.
You kind of have these nihilistic delusions that you're dead, or you're kind of stuck in a world that's dead, or your body might be rotting from the inside, which taps on to, obviously, zombie beliefs, which I did a wildly deep dive into zombie beliefs. It is so different from what I originally thought. So different. Yeah, it's so wild. So wild.
Well, if you got time, can you expound a little bit on this zombie?
In the original Night of the Living Dead, they never used the Z word. They always called them ghouls. And if you're anything like me, you thought a ghoul was kind of this thing that hangs out in cemeteries and eats bodies. So turns out that is nowhere near the case in actual Arabic folklore. You cannot find a recorded instance in the folklore of ghouls doing this. So they sometimes could talk too. So the idea of a ghoul, which they usually see as a precursor to zombies, is there. The other thing where we get the word zombie from is Z-O-M-B-I in Haitian folklore. And there, the zombies, they don't kill people. They're actually vegetarians. If they were to eat meat, they would stop being a zombie, if you look at Haitian folklore. Or if they ate salt, so they can only eat bland food off of banana leaves. And that was the diet of a zombie. So they're far less scary figures and far more tragic figures. And so the zombification process would take a lot of time to go into, but it's kind of on the verge of medicine, psychology, and the occult. And people do believe they're zombies. There are recorded cases of people who they came back from the dead there. And it's part of that cultural framework. So my best guess of what a movie zombie would be is if you took a Norse Draugr, which is like, if you can imagine a Viking zombie, undead Viking, mix that a little bit with Arabic ghouls, mix it with the Chinese Jiangxi, and then put it all in an industrial blender, make that a terrible goop, and then name it after a misspelling of the Haitian zombie. Then you've got the American zombie.
I actually had a student, I require term paper in pretty much all my classes, but in my physiology of exercise class, I require it. It's like the first term paper they have to write in the major. And I had a student a number of years ago that approached me about, can I do mine on whether or not zombies can exist? And at first my inclination was, you're kidding me. And I was like, you know what? It's actually a fairly interesting, as long as you can tie it into human physiology, go for it. I'm really curious to see what you come up with. And it was interesting because he was dealing with, the whole process of ATP formation and all those kind of things and blood flow and brain function and everything else. And
it's wild stuff. And that you could also see, we were talking about the nocebo effect. They see that as having a real core there, as well as that pufferfish poison, tetrodotoxin. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which paralyzes the body. I'm sure you could explain it.
Maybe not, but yeah. So this is fascinating stuff. I'll have to have you back on, especially if you write another book. You better reach out to me and say, "Hey, I got another book here to talk about."
Happy to do so.
I learned a lot today.
Okay.
Now,
it was fun. You asked good questions.
Not waking up in the morning, but so just kind of keep doing what you're doing. Keep writing the books. I hope, and I'll have links to all your website, the book, and everything else in the description notes.
Oh, fantastic.
Just keep doing what you're doing and keep bringing that information to us and keep aging well.
Keeps me off the streets. I will do so. And it keeps me feeling young and vigorous. So
that's good. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.